She pulled back up to the house that she had dropped her boyfriend off at earlier, but he was laying face down on the front lawn in the snow. "Did I hit him? Did I hit him?" she screamed. Or was it, "I hit him, I hit him"? What happened to John O'Keefe that snowy January night? Who was responsible? Welcome back. I'm Cassie, and this is A Wicked World. Today's story is a little bit different than the ones I usually bring to you. While I usually put my main focus on the victim, today's story potentially has two victims. Every story has two sides, and this one has two very different sides. Let me know what you think by the end of the video. Who do you think did it? This is the story of John O'Keefe and Karen Reed. John O'Keefe of Canton, Massachusetts was 46 years old and was born and raised in Braintree, Massachusetts. John had graduated from Braintree High School and later Northeastern University in Boston. He then went on to earn his master's degree in criminal justice from UMass. John was a Boston police officer for the past 16 years. And while John had no children of his own, he did have custody of his niece and nephew. Their parents had passed away in 2013 and 2014, and John stepped in to raise the children. His family says he was a very dedicated police officer, and he was the kind of guy who would go out of his way to help someone. He was also a very caring and loving uncle/dad. On January 28th, 2022, John and his girlfriend, Karen Reed, who was 41 at the time, went out for drinks at the Waterfall Bar and Grill in Canton, Mass. John and Karen had been dating for about 2 years, and while they didn't live together yet, Karen would often spend the nights at John's house. Karen actually lived in Mansfield, while John lived in Canton. The two are about 15 minutes apart from one another. And Karen was actually a financial lecturer at Bentley University. John's parents would say that the couple was very happy and seemed to be on the right track in their relationship. So while John and Karen were at the Waterfall Bar and Grill, they bumped into one of John's friends, along with some other acquaintances. This included Jennifer McCabe, Matthew McCabe, Brian Albert, and Nicole Albert. Jennifer and John knew each other because Jennifer's daughter was actually friends with John's niece, who he had custody of. Later, when the bar closed, the two were invited back to Brian and Nicole Albert's house for some drinks and a party. Just a side note, Brian Albert is actually a Boston police officer, as well as a trained boxer and fighter. And Nicole Albert, Brian's wife, is Jennifer McCabe's sister. When they were invited, Karen asked John, "Can we make sure we're welcome there? Nobody extended the invite to me. I didn't hear the invite extended to you either." Regardless of this, the couple ended up driving to the Alberts' home after obtaining the address from Jennifer. On the way over to the party, Karen decided that she wasn't going to go. She was just going to drop off John and then go home, and he could find a ride home later. Not only was it late, but Karen didn't know anybody, so she didn't really feel comfortable going. Her and John lived pretty close by though, so it was no big deal to drop him off and then just head home, and she figured he'd make his way back home later. When John and Karen arrived at the house on Fairview Road in Canton, John texted Jennifer asking if she was inside, because she was really the only one that he knew there, and he wanted to make sure that he would know somebody. After he sent the text, he didn't hear back from her, but he decided to just get out of the car and go into the house anyways. Karen said she saw John walk up to the front steps, but then looked down at her cell phone and didn't actually see him go in. Now, Karen had dropped John off at the bottom of the driveway of the Alberts' house, and after she dropped him off, she pulled up a few feet, so she was parked in front of the front lawn. There she waited for John to send her a text. He was supposed to text her once he got inside, and she was all set to leave. But he never texted her. 10 minutes went by, and she decided just to go home. Karen headed back to John's house, where she continued to call and text him till around 1:30 in the morning. And at that point, she fell asleep. She never heard back from John. Karen woke up very early the next morning and noticed that John had never come home that night. So at 4:53 in the morning, she called Jennifer McCabe to see if she knew where John was. Karen was frantic and asked Jennifer if she had seen him or knew what happened to him after he'd left the party. And Jennifer, who was still up at that hour for some reason, told her that she did not know where he was and that John actually had never entered the Alberts' house that night. She did, however, tell Karen that she would go with her and help her look for John. A friend of Jennifer's named Carrie Roberts, who was not at the house that night, also decided to help them look for John. Carrie ended up driving the car as, at this point, Karen was hysterical. The three women drove to the Alberts' home, where the get-together had just been hours earlier. As they approached the house, Karen immediately saw John lying next to the side of the home's driveway in the snow that had freshly fallen that night. Both Carrie and Jennifer claimed to have not seen John's body, but Karen had. However, John's body would have been clearly visible from the road for anybody who was passing by. Not to mention, Carrie and Jennifer were sitting in the front seats of the car, so for Karen to have seen him in the back and them to have not seen him would be pretty difficult, especially since John was around 250 pounds and he was only lying about 12 feet away from the road. The three women jumped out of the car and Karen ran to John. She started trying to perform CPR, but unfortunately, he was already gone. Canton police officers arrived at the home soon after 6 a.m. that morning on January 29th. It was determined that John had died from blunt force trauma as well as hypothermia. That means that after John was struck with some sort of heavy object, he was dragged outside into the freezing New England temperatures, still alive. John's arm had 6 bloodied lacerations. His eyes were swollen shut and black and blue. His eyelid also had a cut on it, and his clothes were covered in blood and vomit. He had a 2-inch laceration on the back of his head, as well as multiple skull fractures. It looked like John had been beaten to death. But this is not what police were saying, and it wasn't long before Karen Reed became their main suspect. Police believed that since Karen had been the only one to see John's body when they pulled up in the car, that implicated her because she would have known where John's body was. After speaking with witnesses, police believed that Karen had actually backed up into John with her Lexus SUV and then taken off. But there's one thing. Those injuries couldn't have been caused by a car backing into him, especially since there was grass and fresh snow that would have cushioned his fall. Originally, the Canton police had arrived at the scene when 911 was called, but the investigation was soon turned over to the Masti police and specifically to Trooper Michael Proctor, who was handling it. He interviewed Jennifer McCabe, her husband, Brian Albert, and Nicole Albert at Jennifer McCabe's house on January 29th around 11 a.m. Jennifer said that the night before, she had seen Karen enter the Waterfall Bar and Grill carrying a cocktail glass that she believed was filled with vodka and soda. Jennifer was trying to implicate that Karen was already drunk at that point. Jennifer said that she saw Karen and John pull up to the Alberts' house around 12:30 a.m., but she said that John never entered the house, and she believed that maybe him and Karen had just changed their minds and driven away. Carrie Roberts, who had been in the car with Jennifer and Karen that night while they were out looking for John, told police that Karen was hysterical while they were out looking for him. And at one point, she even said, "I hope he hasn't been hit by a snowplow." And that she hoped she herself had not hit him. Carrie also told police that at this point, she had observed a broken taillight on Karen's car. Jennifer corroborated this story. Jennifer and Carrie both also said that Karen was so drunk that she didn't remember even going there that night. It was reported by Officer Proctor that there were 2 plastic red pieces of taillight found in the snow near John O'Keefe's body. This, however, was nowhere in the reports from the Canton police, the ones who were first to show up at the scene. It only mentioned that they had collected droplets of blood in the snow, as well as a smashed cocktail glass that they believed Karen had actually hit John with before she got in the car and backed into him. They were trying to say that this glass was what had caused the lacerations on his arm.
If there's no sign of an altercation or fight, how can he turn around and say that a cocktail glass did this? They can't talk out of both sides of their mouth. How could they reasonably ignore two black eyes, a laceration over his right eye, a laceration at his nose? He looked like he had gone 10 rounds with Mike Tyson, as my colleague has once analogized. Of course there's evidence that he was in a fight. The back of his hands, deeply bruised. Those are called defensive wounds. I don't care what their medical examiner called it. Anybody who's seen any sort of a fight, a street fight, knows that the back of the hands, the back of the arms, get the brunt of the punches as you cover your face. Of course there were signs of a fight. Not just a fight, a brutal fight.
Officer Proctor also claimed that Karen had done a 3-point turn after dropping John off. This would have been the only way that she could have backed into him, because as I said, she had dropped him off at the bottom of the driveway and then simply pulled her car forward while waiting for him to text her back. When he didn't, she just kept driving. She didn't do a 3-point turn, back into him, turn around and go in that direction, as they had said. And the reason that they knew this was because when Officer Proctor had spoken to Jennifer McCabe earlier, she said that Karen had left going south, which would have meant she did not do a 3-point turn. Only a few days after John's death, Karen was arrested and charged with manslaughter. Though in June of 2022, this would be upgraded to second-degree murder. For reasons that are unknown. The same day at 4:30 p.m., Officer Proctor went to Karen's parents' house in Dighton, Mass. This is where Karen's black SUV was parked. At that time, he noted in his report that the SUV had a cracked and broken taillight. But, according to phone records, Officer Proctor had actually called for a tow truck at 3:02 p.m., which was much before he claimed to have seen this broken taillight. So why was he calling to have it towed? That also means that Trooper Proctor was left alone with the SUV for about an hour before the tow truck arrived. So what happened in that time? A Canton firefighter, who was one of the first responders to the scene, and was also a friend of one of the Albert's daughters, said that she heard Karen saying, over and over, "I hit him, I hit him." Karen said what she was actually saying is, "Did I hit him? Did I hit him?" Because she was in a panic, and that's what people were leading her to believe at that point. She thought maybe mistakenly she had hit him and he had fallen into the snow and died of hypothermia, but she could not remember anything even close to that happening. Trooper Proctor also never once mentioned that he was good friends with both the McCabe and the Alberts families. So Chris Albert, who was Brian Albert's brother, was at the bar that night with John and Karen and everybody else. It is, however, unknown if he went inside the house of the Alberts that night. This is because Trooper Proctor has stopped the geofencing data from being seen. Geofencing data basically shows where someone's cell phone is within a certain perimeter. This would have helped determine who had been in the house the night that John was murdered. Now, Chris Albert only lived a few houses away from John O'Keefe, and Chris also had an 18-year-old son named Colin Albert. Colin was known to have an aggressive personality, and from his online posts and videos, seems to have some serious anger issues. On top of that, in the past, Colin had been very confrontational with John, trespassing through his yard and throwing garbage onto his lawn. Lucky for Colin, though, I don't think he really has to worry about getting in trouble, because his uncle Brian is a Boston police sergeant, his uncle Kevin, a Canton police officer, and his father Chris was recently elected to the town's Board of Selectmen. Trooper Proctor and his family had also known Colin from the time that he was very young, and Trooper Proctor was the one who was handling everything in this investigation, including the evidence, who would be interrogated, and ultimately, who would be charged with the crime. It was all in his hands. There was some evidence that had been hidden from the prosecution, evidence that would implicate someone other than Karen in John's murder. There was a social media photo of Colin posted a couple days after John's murder, which shows Colin with lacerated knuckles indicating that he had recently punched something or someone, and many times. There was also DNA evidence found on John's body that indicated a dog may have been part of the attack on him that night. Another thing that at first was hidden was a 2-minute clip from the Canton Library security camera, which would show if Karen's SUV actually did have a shattered taillight or not. Karen is now up against a lot of powerful people. Her attorney filed a motion to have Jennifer McCabe, as well as Brian Albert's, phones forensically searched. Brian Albert's phone has yet to be searched, and Jennifer McCabe actually handed hers over voluntarily to the police after John was found dead. I expect that she thought doing this would make her look less guilty. However, police were able to see that she had deleted plenty of text messages between her and the Alberts, and her and her husband, on the night that John died. The police searched Jennifer McCabe's phone, and they said they found nothing that was evidence. Karen's attorneys did not believe this, though, and they hired their own expert to have Jennifer's phone forensically examined. It was at that time that it was discovered that even more crucial evidence was being withheld. Jennifer had apparently Googled how long to die in cold at 2:27 a.m. on the morning that John O'Keefe had died. Remember, his body was not found until around 5 a.m. What is also odd is that Brian Albert, whose house John's body was found outside, was never questioned on that night at all. He actually never even left his house to go outside to see what was going on, see if John was okay, console Karen because she was crying. And he's a trained first responder as well as a Boston police sergeant. Another thing that's odd is the Canton deputy police chief lives across the street from the Alberts. He owns a Ring video doorbell, so you would think he would have caught what exactly happened to John, right? Wrong. He says that he didn't catch anything on his video camera that night. But it's been proven that if you stand where the Ring video camera is on his door, you can see very clearly the exact spot where John's body was found. So it's highly unlikely he didn't catch anything. The Ring doorbell was also never subpoenaed. What Karen's attorneys believe actually happened that night was that after John had texted Jennifer and then gotten out of Karen's SUV, he did enter the Alberts' house. At that point, he was most likely surprised to see that Colin was there, since the two of them had issues in the past. Then, at some point, it's believed that Colin confronted and punched John. It's thought that Brian Albert then joined in beating him as well, and his loyal German shepherd Chloe also started attacking John and tore into his arm. This would explain the marks that were found all over John's arm, as well as the dog DNA that had been discovered. So Chloe was a German shepherd that was the family's dog for years. But then, after John's death, suddenly she was given away and nobody was saying where she had gone. Karen's attorney is now trying to track down that dog and get a DNA sample. At the house that night, there were at least 11 other people besides John. Now, I'm not saying all of them knew what happened that night. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. However, some of them do know what happened to John that night. Not to mention, the entire party was over and everybody had gone home merely an hour after John had arrived. That's a pretty short party. A man by the name of Ryan Nagel had driven his sister to the Alberts' house the night of John's death. He's the only one in this story that does not have direct ties to the Alberts. So this is what he told police that he witnessed. He saw Karen Reed pull up outside the Alberts' home that night. He said that he and her had arrived at the same time and they had been coming from opposite directions. But he had yielded to her as she had turned onto the Alberts' street. He said that Karen parked at the end of the driveway and dropped John off. After that, he saw her pull up some feet and sit there for a little while. This was at the time that she was waiting for John to text her back. He said that he did not see any damage to her vehicle, didn't hear anybody screaming, and did not see Karen acting erratically or drunk at all. He did actually say that as he drove by on his way out, he saw Karen sitting alone in her SUV with the interior light on. Ryan also said he did not notice John's body laying anywhere on the lawn at this point. Now, John's phone tracks him going up and down the stairs of the Alberts home, as well as tracks him walking around their house from 12:21 to 12:24. And if you remember, Jennifer McCabe said that John did not even show up until 12:30 a.m., which would have been impossible since he was in the house before that, and she said that he had never even entered the house. This information was kept from the defense. Jennifer McCabe's phone shows that her and her husband, as well as 2 teenagers that had been at the party, left the Alberts house at 1:47 a.m. Jennifer gave both these teens rides home, possibly to drive by John O'Keefe's house after and see if Karen was awake and looking for him, or if they still had time to hide their crime. Jennifer's phone data also shows that once she got home, she did not go right to bed, which you would think she would since it was probably after 2 a.m. at this point. No, instead, she paced around the house for hours afterwards, possibly waiting for Karen to call and see where John was. So the broken cocktail glass that had been found next to John's body, as I had said, police thought that this was one of the murder weapons. However, Jennifer never even indicated that she saw this glass when she first discovered John's body with Karen. Karen had been the first person to notice the glass. So on top of the already incriminating Google search that Jennifer had made the morning that John died, she made another Google search asking, how long does it take to digest food? It's believed that she searched for this because she knew that food particles in a dead person's body could be examined to see how long that person had been deceased. I'm assuming John had some food at the party before he got killed. And she wanted to make sure that it fit the narrative of Karen hitting him with her SUV and not anyone in the house being involved, which was long after Karen had already left. Jennifer also again Googled how long to die in cold. Most likely, she was doing this to cover up her first search, which was from earlier, before John's body was discovered. Now she was searching for it later, so she was hoping that that was the only search that was going to be seen. However, the first time that she had Googled it, she misspelled how. So both searches showed up in her search history. Brian Albert, the owner of the house the party had been held at, also sold this house after being accused in September by Karen's attorney. It was his childhood home, but suddenly he was selling it, and quickly for that matter, for $50,000 less than the original asking price. This means that the house was never searched by police. Canton police never saw the plastic pieces of taillight next to John's body, and they were the first ones to the scene. At this time, only 2 inches of snow had fallen, and droplets of John's blood was clearly visible in the snow all around, which means that the taillight pieces would have been visible as well. About 12 hours after John's body was found, a foot of snow had fallen at that point, and Trooper Proctor had gone back to the scene on some sort of inkling, and then found the pieces of taillight in the snow. Not sure how that would be possible if there's more snow now. So Karen did have a slightly cracked taillight on her SUV, but there is Ring doorbell video evidence from Karen's home showing that she had accidentally backed into John's car, and this had caused her taillight to get a crack in it, but it hadn't shattered. It was just a crack. Canton Police Chief Ken Barkowitz also decided to go back out to the scene on February 4th, which was almost a week later. And at this point, he tried to say that he saw 2 additional pieces of taillight plastic in the snow from his moving vehicle. Canton police have also said that pieces of the broken glass as well as human hair had been found on the back of Karen's bumper. So Karen Reed is facing second-degree murder charges as well as motor vehicle manslaughter while driving under the influence and leaving the scene of a collision causing injury and death. Legal experts have also spoken out and said that most of the evidence against Karen at this point looks circumstantial, and without a direct witness who saw her hit John, it's unlikely that the prosecution's case will hold up. Just a few days ago, on August 25th, 2023, the Norfolk County DA's office issued a video statement. In this, he condemned the harassment of several witnesses that are involved in Karen's case. In his out-of-court remarks, District Attorney Michael Morrissey stated outright that several witnesses were not to blame for Officer John O'Keefe's death. He said, "This will be the first statement of its kind in my dozen years as Norfolk District Attorney. The harassment of witnesses in the murder prosecution of Karen Reed is absolutely baseless. Innuendo is not evidence. False narrative is not evidence. It should be an outrage to any decent person, and it needs to stop." Karen is expected back in court on September 15th, and no trial date has been set yet. John O'Keefe's wake was held at St. Francis of Assisi Church in Braintree. More than 300 people waited in line to attend. Mayor Michelle Wu led the procession. John was buried at the Blue Hill Cemetery after in Braintree. Well, thank you for listening to all of John O'Keefe's story today, along with Karen Reed's story. This case clearly seems to be a cover-up, though maybe there's information that we haven't been presented with yet. Maybe there's other stuff that we'll learn during the trial. But personally, it smells pretty fishy. How do you feel about this case, though? I just hope that John's family and friends get justice for him. Because regardless, a man's life was taken that night. The person or people who are responsible for this need to be held accountable and punished. If she's innocent, which is the way it's looking, then she should not have to lose her life as well to a possible life sentence in jail. Hopefully, justice is served in the end, and we find out exactly what happened to John that night. So if you like true crime, and you want to hear it from me, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button below, and give this video a like if you feel like it. Until next time, guys, take care. Bye. Now, there's even more of A Wicked World on Patreon. You'll have access to exclusive videos each month and more. Any support truly helps to make sure the victims never get forgotten and to highlight the shortcomings of society associated with each case. So check it out at patreon.com/awickedworld or use the Patreon app.